Welcome everyone to 2023's United States Media Literacy Week, a time in the year when we celebrate the incredible work being done in media literacy education, challenge ourselves to learn more about media literacy, and work together to spread the news that media literacy is more important than ever. We're thrilled you're joining us for today's session, Sifting Through the Spectacle, How Media Literacy Can Help Us Interpret Political Messages. I'm Megan Fromm, Education Manager for the National Association for Media Literacy Education, also known as NAMELY. This session is a collaboration between NAMELY and the Service Project, which we'll share more about in just a moment. In our short time together today, we'll introduce you both to NAMELY and Service. We'll highlight the incredible curriculum project that brings together civics, duty, and media literacy. Then we'll spend the rest of our session learning about media literacy, journalism, and political ads, including how messages seek to persuade us. Our hope is by the end of this session, you'll have learned some concrete tools for interpreting media messages, and you'll feel even more confident about finding your own voice in our loud media world. Now I'd like to introduce you to Wendy Rivenberg to tell us more about the Service Project. Wendy, thank you for being here.
Wonderful to be joining you today. Thanks, Meg. So I'm here to introduce Supporting Readiness Through Vital Civic Empowerment, or Service, which encompasses user-friendly, localized civics curriculum for high school, including 5 inquiry-based modules that incorporate media literacy, career skill development and exploration, and align with national and regional standards, including career technical education and other standards. So Service includes design and delivery of professional learning materials and a teacher toolkit, as well as the curriculum. And I should note that Service was funded by the Department of Defense. The curricular materials follow a framework for civic inquiry and action that empowers students to start with themselves and then progress through these stages of inquiry and action, exploring the theme, choosing an issue that they care about, researching the issue in sort of their local context, creating a plan to get involved and to take some kind of action, and then sharing and reflecting throughout, but especially at the end. The media literacy component is really critical to emphasize today, and we also want to highlight the place-based civics and the career readiness components, which are the 3 pillars in the Service civics curriculum. And we have prepared this video sort of montage to give you a sense of how we have envisioned this in the classroom and how it's already being adopted in classrooms through the pilot and currently out there, because it is free and available for you to go view and to download. So for the moment, if we can play the video.
Civic engagement is a cornerstone of a thriving democracy, and high-quality civics education empowers youth to take action on issues they care about. Service, the Supporting Readiness Through Vital Civic Empowerment program, is a groundbreaking initiative supported by the U.S. Department of Defense and implemented by EDC.
Once students understand the democratic process, they begin to understand not only their rights, but also the responsibilities and duties of citizenship.
Service bridges the gap between classroom learning and the real world by incorporating career exploration, hands-on experiences, and the development of professional skills. Our user-friendly high school curriculum integrates civics, media literacy, and career readiness, and aligns with national and regional standards, including career technical education. Our 5 modules empower students to research topics of interest and effectively communicate their ideas for positive change.
As I get ready to graduate high school, I now know that my voice is powerful.
Service also provides educators with professional learning opportunities and materials, all free of charge. Together through this program, we are nurturing active citizens who will become the leaders of the future.
Thank you for playing that for us. We have an incredibly rich network of partners that have supported the service project in the design and initial conception, the design, and the pilot project, and now in the rollout of the curriculum. With these partners and our team of student advisors and adult advisors from the worlds of equity and civics, media literacy, military service, and career readiness, we've drawn from impactful strategies for civic learning and empowerment. Notably, our most important partners are the 30 teachers and more than 550 students who worked with us in piloting the service curriculum in 18 schools and across 15 states, including military-connected schools with JROTC programs and public service and public safety career pathways. We are thrilled to be sharing this curriculum with you, this high school curriculum that's adaptable for other settings. And if you go to the, you can click on the QR code, you can snap the QR code, or you can go to service.edc.org to create a free account and explore the curricular materials and the teacher toolkit, and let us know how it goes. We're always here to answer questions and to work with you in building out the resources for robust civic education. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Wendy. We are so thrilled at Namely to have been a partner on this project, and we're really excited for this Media Literacy Week presentation as a way of just building on the civic skills that you've developed and thinking especially about elections, ads, and political advertising. So thank you for being here. So before we get started with the meat of our session, I wanted to make sure everybody knows a little bit about Namely, who we are, and how we frame our work. We are the leading nonprofit membership organization dedicated to advancing media literacy education in the United States. And we've been doing this since 1997. We have more than 8,000 members and over 90 organizational partners across the country. We exist today because of the generous support of our community, which includes individual members, teachers, educators, librarians, advocates, media producers, our staff, our volunteers, our organizational and corporate partners, our board of directors, and our funders. We host an annual virtual professional development conference for educators. Hopefully we'll see some of you there next summer in 2024. And we also support the Journal of Media Literacy Education, which is an open access, peer-reviewed academic journal. We host US Media Literacy Week every fall. And this September, we also hosted our first inaugural Leadership Summit on Media Literacy Education. Our vision, quite simply, is to see media literacy highly valued and widely practiced as an essential life skill. Now, before we really get into everything, let's play a quick little game. Tell me if you think the following images are real or fake. No Googling, just take your best guess. First, this chicken that lived for 18 months without a head. What do you think? Real or fake? Unbelievably, this is real. Mike the Headless Chicken, who hails from Fruto, Colorado, was about to be dinner one evening, but the farmer chopped his head off just above the brainstem, and he lived for months without a head, and he was fed with a dropper down his throat. Now, how about this image? This is the cover of National Geographic from 1982. Is it real or is it fake? The answer here is actually a little murkier. The photographer took many photos of the pyramids and didn't quite like the overall aesthetic. He created a composite image by combining multiple photos from his whole set, and he put them together and layered them so that the pyramids would be more aesthetically pleasing in this tall profile dimensions of the magazine cover. So if you were to go to Egypt and stand in the same place the photographer did to see the pyramid in the foreground, you wouldn't see the pyramid in the background the same way. And finally, how about this? Do you think this is a real or a fake photo of a person? As it turns out, this photo is computer generated from a website that is literally called thispersondoesnotexist.com. It takes public images from across the web and it stitches those images together to create everything that you see here. So a nose from one person, a chin from another, hair from somebody else, and it creates the portrait of a totally fake person, someone who does not exist. So hopefully, as you can see, and as you well know, the idea that things are true or false, real or fake or black and white, it's just not that simple. In reality, we know that things can be in the gray area, in the in-between. Messages are really complicated. Just think about the types of messages you might encounter on a daily basis. You see advertising and entertainment, and that entertainment might be movies or books or music. You see infotainment and news and opinion. You get public relations and marketing and probably even some propaganda and fake news. So the gray area is where media literacy lives. We view media literacy as the ability to access, analyze, evaluate, create, and act using all forms of communication. So knowing that our worlds are really saturated with all of these types of messages, we use media literacy as a way to sift through it all. But what does this look like in practice? What skills does a media literate person demonstrate? Well, a media literate person is someone who can ask questions to analyze media. Perhaps we're asking about the author or the purpose, or even who paid for this. People who are media literate can also understand and identify the impact of media messages on themselves, their communities, their politics, society, and even ideologies. In short, media can really shape a lot about what we think we know and understand and believe about the world. People who are media literate can use tools and analysis to ascertain truth. We, of course, want to know what actually is real and what might be fake, and media literacy can help us get there. And people who are media literate can understand and identify the impact of media messages on themselves, their communities, politics, society, and ideologies. And this might be something you're familiar with as people who create media all the time and who use media to post and share your ideas. People who are media literate can thoughtfully and impactfully create media for a purpose. Now, all of this sounds hopefully pretty great. We want to be media literate, but it might sound a little idealistic too, right? In a world that is saturated and bombards us with all these media messages, it can feel a little difficult to practice these skills. Now, take the upcoming presidential election, or really any election season for that matter. Did you know that Americans received more than 15 billion political texts in 2022? Straight to your phone, right? Text messages about a candidate or about an issue. And did you know that campaigns and outside groups are projected to spend $2.7 billion on ads in the 2024 presidential election alone? This means that as we get close to electing the next president, or really during any election season, we need to be even more mindful about practicing our media literacy skills. It can feel really difficult to find accurate, quality, high quality information about democracy and civics and political systems, or even candidates. So you're going to see and hear a ton of advertising during this election season, and it'll be important to know a little bit about how all of that works. And while we hope that all of the different types of platforms or publications might work hard to only publish truth, the reality is that there are really different laws that allow different types of publications or platforms to have more more or less responsibility for actually printing the truth. So let's think about political advertising, for instance. Did you know that newspapers have the full authority or independence to choose what political ads they run? The First Amendment protects them and their right to make those decisions. So they can run almost anything that they choose in terms of political advertising. And if something turns out to be wrong, there are only some instances where they can be held liable for incorrect information in those ads. In marked contrast, broadcast radio and broadcast television stations actually can't pick and choose what political ads they air, at least not for candidates of the same office. So if there is an election for mayor, they have to decide to either run all the political ads for that office from any side, all sides, or none at all. It's kind of an all or nothing situation. Well, why is that? It's because airwaves, where broadcast signals travel, are actually a scarce resource. There's not an infinite number of airwaves to broadcast a radio station or broadcast cable. So there can only be so many stations on the spectrum at any one time. And this creates scarcity. It also creates the danger that some points of view might never make it to airtime. So broadcast stations like ABC, CBS, or radio stations you might hear in the car or at the dentist's office, they're in a much different position when it comes to publishing political ads. If they do decide to run political ads on the air, they're generally not legally responsible for what is said in that ad. Now, a lot of you probably watch cable TV, or you watch streaming, right? Which is sort of similar to cable TV in this area. Cable TV channels can choose to run anything. They can choose whether they run political ads with a ton of freedom and flexibility, and they're not typically held liable for the content of those ads and whether or not they are 100% accurate. Now, finally, social media, where you might actually get a lot of your news, is also its own category when it comes to political advertising. Social media companies are privately owned, which means they get a lot of freedom to decide what their policies and their content restrictions are in terms of what's allowed on their platform. And the law really protects these platforms from being responsible for the content that others post. So aside from some rules about obscenity or violence, people can post a lot of things related to politics that aren't going to be taken down even if they're not true. All of this means that a lot of the burden of figuring out what is accurate information is going to fall on us, the consumers. So let's look at how political messages work and how they try to influence us and persuade us. Kent State University professor Mike Johnson, who teaches advertising and strategy, looks at political ads through these three categories, which I think are really helpful. Candidate-focused ads, which highlight a candidate's values. These are the kind of ads that are going to tell you all of the strengths of a candidate and what they will bring to you and your community if you vote for them. Issue-based ads are those that focus on advocating for certain issues. So think about things like climate change or immigration. Those are issues. And the third category is attack ads. These are designed to weaken an opposing candidate's platform and make you think less of them or think that they're unfit for office entirely. You might take a moment and just think about what kind of ads you see in the media that you consume. Thinking about the messages embedded in advertisements is really important. How do these advertisements work to get our attention? Our brains don't always help us sift through persuasive messages very well, so we should probably also learn a little bit about how our brains sometimes work against us. Let's talk about 6 specific types of persuasion techniques that are really common in political advertising. First, the famous person testimonial. This is where a celebrity or a person who you might recognize as being famous endorses somebody. So if Beyonce comes out with an ad for a president, you have just seen a famous person testimonial. Plain folks pitch, or the plain folks appeal, are those ads that basically say, you know, the average person thinks this way, so you should too. These are ads that make candidates look like they represent the majority of America. So they're often really general and have wide sweeping statements. Snob appeal is when an ad essentially appeals to our desire to feel better than others or part of an exclusive club, right? Some way that we know something that other people don't, and we feel like we really belong by supporting this candidate or buying into their ideas. The bandwagon effect is another type of persuasive tactic, and this is sort of similar to plain folks, but instead of appealing to just the average person, we're also suggesting that there's momentum in how everybody else is joining the cause, so we should too, right? We don't want to be left out. You might think of this as FOMO, right? Fear of missing out is very similar to the bandwagon effect. Now, hidden fear appeals work when an ad essentially conveys a message that not thinking a certain way or not voting for a person or not buying a certain thing is actually going to harm you or your family or the people you care most about. And the last one that I want us to think about is the tactic of glittering generalities. This is where ads use really vague words or phrases to attract the audience, but when we dig deeper, they actually aren't saying much. Words like the best or everyone don't actually give us a lot to work with. They're just glittering generalities. Another way political ads can persuade us is to generate something called spectacle. This is when you do something outrageous or unexpected in order to get mainstream news media to publish stories about it. Advertisements on TV cost money, cost tens of thousands of dollars to buy 30 seconds of ad time. But the media will tend to cover controversial ads or unique political moments. And so this buys candidates extra airtime as the media either discuss the ad or they talk about the event or the thing that the candidate did because it was unique or rare. Sometimes this kind of spectacle is what we might call infotainment. These are media messages that might contain a little bit of information, but they're mostly entertaining to people because they create drama or they create controversy. Another part of spectacle is to stoke outrage in people, in viewers and consumers of media, to get them really fired up about a cause or a side of an issue, and to use that outrage to create even more conflict. When this happens, people sometimes get discouraged from participating in elections, and some people are impassioned or even more convinced that they need to act. One example of this idea of spectacle and outrage was actually seen a lot on Facebook during our last 2016 presidential election. You may have heard about how Russian propaganda disguised itself as political advertising, and it actually often even pretended to be groups related to things like racial justice movements. And these ads were targeting American voters through the Facebook platform. You can see here, this is actually one example of that type of ad. This is spectacle. It was meant to create outrage. And this is from a group called Blacktivist, which pretended to be like other racial justice groups in America, when in fact, it was actually from a Russian propaganda team. So the message in this ad and in ads like it was meant to create further political conflict and drama among groups in the United States. So election messaging and all the different types of ads and techniques that can come with it are pretty persuasive. And we want to know a little bit more about why. Why are they so impactful? And what are our brains doing or not doing to actually help us process these messages? You might have heard of this term, cognitive bias. Well, cognitive bias is a really broad phrase that describes limitations in our brain. These are limitations in our thinking that can cause flaws in our judgment. When we might want to be logical, these limitations take over, and emotions or other ways of thinking that aren't logical sort of drive the train. It's kind of like an annoying brain glitch that can lead us to make faulty conclusions because we're not actually thinking as rationally as we think we are. And political advertising, persuasive messaging, propaganda, all of these types of things that are meant to persuade us, they love to exploit these cognitive limitations. And we're often not even conscious that it's happening. Confirmation bias is a type of cognitive limitation or cognitive bias. And this is when we actually seek out information that we already believe. So for example, most of us don't type into Google, cats versus dogs. We type, why are cats better than dogs? Right? Our opinions are already set. We just want to feel reinforced in those opinions. Another cognitive limitation called anchoring bias essentially means that we rely really heavily on the first piece of information that we were given about a topic. So maybe the first time we're introduced to it and we hear something about it, that's what sticks in our brains, even if it's not the most accurate. Imagine a Google search result and our tendency to go to the first link, click on it, and that's what we know, without searching for more sources or evaluating what else exists. That can create an anchoring bias. Now, let's face it, we all like to imagine we're really informed on major things that are going on in the world. But the truth is that there's probably more we don't know about a lot of things than we do know, and we're not always super quick to admit that. This is the illusion of explanatory depth. It's a type of cognitive limitation in which we think we know more about the world than we actually do. Now, you might be looking at all of this and say, well, thank goodness we have people to fact check and help us figure out what's going on. True, fact checking is really important. But even with fact checking or correcting misinformation or pointing out things in political persuasive messaging that aren't true, our brain doesn't always accept it. Why is that? Well, once our brains are exposed to misinformation, it's really hard to get it out of our heads. This is called the continued influence effect. Corrections or fact checking actually can fail because even when we see in that moment that something turns out not to be true, later on, we're continually influenced by the original thought we had, and we think that it was fact. The implied truth effect is also a really big issue for how our brains work and how platforms work. So when a platform like Instagram or TikTok or the news applies a label or a correction to a certain story or a certain advertisement, but they don't apply it to like everything, we tend to think, oh, that must mean anything without a label isn't true. So we think these labels imply that only things with a label that have been verified or fact-checked are actually true. When in reality, it's probably just that they can't get to every single thing on their platform. The tainted truth effect means that sometimes When we correct things or we put warnings or we try to identify something that's not fact in a message, it can actually taint people's perception of media as a whole. It makes people maybe distrustful. It can make them more cynical. It can actually make people just start to doubt everything that they see online. And then, of course, repetition. If you've ever played a sport or a musical instrument, you know repetition is key to getting those skills down. Well, the same is kind of true in understanding messages. If we hear a statement more than once, we're more likely to believe it's true. Repetition can also make a belief seem more commonplace or widespread than it actually is, and leading people to think that, well, if others think it's true, it probably is. So given all this, what do we do now? Where do we go from here? I think we should take our focus back to media literacy. Remember how early on I mentioned that people who are media literate can ask questions to analyze media. Well, this notion of asking questions about messages is also called media deconstruction. Through inquiry and analysis, or deconstruction, we can become a lot more empowered to understand any message that comes our way, especially political advertising. Media deconstruction relies on a few important principles. First, the idea that all messages are constructed. This means that much like constructing a house or even a piece of artwork, the creator of that message makes both conscious and subconscious decisions about what goes where and how. Another principle is that each medium has different characteristics, strengths, or a unique language of construction. And by medium, we're talking about all of the different ways we receive messages. So television and radio and even posters or a book or an advertisement on TikTok. These are all different mediums, and they all sort of speak a different language. So the language used on social media, for example, is typically really short and snappy with lots of humor and pop culture. That's different than the language that's used, for example, on your nightly newscast that might be on television. So knowing how to identify and speak a little bit of the language of these different mediums can really help us to deconstruct a message. We also want to remember the principle that media messages are produced for a particular purpose, and it's really important to consider what those purposes might be. Why did somebody make this? All media messages contain embedded values and points of view. So each person who's creating a message is doing so from their unique perspective or position in the world. How we are raised, our ideologies, how we grew up, maybe even our religion, these things can impact how we create messages and how we interpret them. And that interpretation is really key to remember. These perspectives mean we are going to interpret things differently from everybody around us. People use their individual skills, beliefs, and experiences to construct their own meanings from media messages. You might have heard that joke, it's not what you say, it's how you say it, right? So if somebody says, please take out, maybe your parents say, please take out the garbage, it feels, they're a little annoyed, they're kind of pleading with you. But if they say, please take out the garbage, right? Then we might even intuit that not only are they upset we haven't done the chore, but that the garbage itself is so overwhelming, it has to be dealt with. These are different ways that we interpret through our own experience. We hear things differently, we take tone into account, and we process messages in a variety of different ways, depending on the experience we're in and the experience we bring. Finally, a core principle of media deconstruction is that media and media messages can influence all of us. They influence our beliefs, our attitudes, behaviors, even the democratic process. So the messages we encounter can drastically impact us. And think about that through political advertising. If a message is telling you your vote doesn't count, or it doesn't matter to participate in civics or in your local elections, that message might actually change how we act. It might make us easily skip out going to the polls if it's raining or the weather is bad. So we want to keep this in mind anytime we are thinking about deconstructing a message. This was a lot. So I think we should practice. I think we should look at an ad. This is from 1964 and take a little bit of time to see how we might deconstruct the message from this advertisement.
From the Library of Congress in Washington, D.C.
These are the stakes to make a world in which all of God's children can live, or to go into the dark. We must either love each other or we must die.
Vote for President Johnson on November 3rd. The stakes are too high for you to stay home.
This has been a presentation of the Library of Congress. Visit us at loc.gov.
Now, this advertisement, when it aired in 1964, and this aired as part of Lyndon B. Johnson's 1964 presidential campaign, it actually created a lot of spectacle. I hope you remember that term. It created a lot of buzz. It actually only aired once, and then it was pulled from the airwaves and never aired again because people thought it wasn't appropriate. But media, news media, journalists, nighttime news spent a lot of time replaying it, analyzing it, talking about it, and in fact, actually deconstructing it to see what it meant and what was this message that feels pretty scary from Lyndon B. Johnson. Thinking about the basic principles of deconstruction that we just looked at, we could actually ask the following questions to help us really pull apart this ad and try to understand it better. We could ask, what kinds of decisions did the creator of this ad have to make as they were creating it? What points did they decide to use this image or that sound or the black and white feel and the sort of scary voice at the end? We could also ask, what are the strengths and weaknesses of a television ad? Remember that idea of knowing the language of the medium? Well, television works to engage us in really specific ways, right? It's very visual. We like to have sound. We like to have a story, and we like to have motion. So how are these ads on television actually working to engage us? We would definitely want to ask, what is the purpose of this ad? And we could do that from a really basic level. The purpose is to get people to vote for Johnson, but we could also really dig deeper with that. Is the purpose for us to be scared, to think more negatively of Johnson's opponent, to think about things like nuclear war, right? So asking the purpose is really key, and we don't just want to stay at that surface level explanation. We would ask, what is the point of view of this ad? So who do we assume is speaking to us and who's the audience, right? Is the speaker actually Lyndon B. Johnson? Or is the speaker sort of this omnipresent person who cares about kids and wants to keep families safe? Because those might not be the same thing. And we could ask how people with different beliefs or life experiences are going to view this ad really differently. People who don't understand nuclear warfare or who didn't grow up in the threat of nuclear war might look at this and think it feels kind of silly or almost comedic. But if we think about the time period of the adults who are voting in 1964, that probably felt like a very realistic threat. And then we would also ask, what behavior does this ad want us to think? How is it trying to impact our values and our behavior? And ultimately, what does that mean for voting, for the civic process, and for elections? Now, if those basics of deconstruction feel a little bit abstract, I also think there are some really great concrete tips from a scholar named Renee Hobbs, and her suggestions would also allow us to deconstruct the Daisy ad with a little bit more specificity. So we could do a reality check. We could just immediately dig in to try to see what is accurate or inaccurate in this media. We could think about the public or private gain or good. In other words, who's benefiting from this message being out there in the world? We can think about what is being left out. When we notice that information or perspectives have been omitted from something, it more clearly allows us to see the point of view that a message is coming from. We could do a values check, right? What does this media say and how is it aligning with or contradicting with the values that I already hold? So what do I already believe in the world? And how do the values in this message link up with that or not so much? We could read between the lines. What is implied but not stated directly in this message? They say the stakes have never been higher. We hear this very dark and scary voice at the end. But they don't come out and say outright, if you don't vote for Johnson, we will have nuclear war, right? So reading between the lines of this particular political ad is really important. We can also think about the techniques. What are the symbols or the rhetorical strategies, that wording or language that is attracting us and getting us emotionally invested? Well, it opens with an adorable little girl in a field picking daisies. And she can't even, she's not even counting to 10 correctly. It's just so cute. So that symbol of youth and innocence and something we want to protect being juxtaposed with the sight of a nuclear explosion, for most people, it's going to activate some kind of emotion. We could look for stereotypes. Stereotypes are often used in advertising. It's actually part of the persuasive technique of using glittering generalities, where we make stereotypes or large general assumptions about people in order to convey messages as simply as possible. We could look at this ad and we could say, is this sort of making something seem too simple, or that there's too easy of a solution? I think this ad actually falls into this category. It's really simplifying this notion of the election into one easy solution. Vote for the safety of this girl or vote for world destruction. And that seems a little too easy or too simplistic for me. And then here's a really helpful point, right? Because we started all of this by saying you're going to get hit with a lot of messages during election season, not to mention the messages you get every day. And we want to deconstruct. We want to think critically. But we also might need to just hit pause. We might need to save this analysis for later. So we might look at a message and we might say, okay, I see this. I'm trying to take it in. but I'm going to save for later any kind of decision about the worth or the value of this message because I'm not ready to activate my brain that way. And that's a really media literate response to messages that we're not quite ready to deal with. So we have explored a lot today. And as you use your media literacy skills in everyday life, it's important to remember that these skills are just going to get stronger over time. You don't have to be perfect to practice media literacy. You just have to start. Being media literate is a lifelong journey. And so if you feel overwhelmed by media messages, you can take a step back and come back to your analysis and critical thinking when you're ready. Our time is almost up here today, so we hope that we've given you some valuable tools to think through all the messages that might come your way. You also got a chance to explore the incredible service curriculum, which highlights civic duty, media literacy, and career opportunities, and we hope you take a chance to dig into that a little bit deeper. Thank you for being with us today, and have a great media literacy week.